The cap flew off my head as I jumped up, nearly choking on the burning smoke filling my lungs. Raucous cheers erupted around the bonfire, empty beer cans crunching underfoot. This graduation party was supposed to be a blast. One final hurrah with my high school crew before we all went our separate ways. But my excitement turned to dread as a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. A woman stepped into the firelight, her face contorted with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It had been 15 years, but I would recognize her anywhere. Marla? My dad's voice cracked behind me, my biological mother, the one who had willingly abandoned us when I was just 3 years old. Hello, Nathan, Aiden. Her eyes bored into mine, glistening with unshed tears. We need to talk. Get off my property, Dad growled, pushing his way through the circle of dumbstruck partygoers. His face was beet red, the vein in his neck throbbing. You have no right being here. Nathan, please. Marla reached out, but Dad smacked her hand away. Our son deserves to know the truth. I flinched at the possessive "our son," as if she had any claim over me after all this time. The truth? Dad scoffed. You mean the truth about how you up and left us for no goddamn reason? Abandoned your family? Marla squared her shoulders, that foreign emotion in her eyes hardening into cold resolve. I didn't have a choice, Nathan. Not after what you did. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. I looked between my parents, desperate for an explanation that somehow made sense. My dad's face had drained of color, his mouth hanging open. Is she telling the truth? I managed to ask. What did you do? Dad blinked slowly, then shook his head as if to clear it. It doesn't matter. Whatever she's after, don't listen to her lies. Lies? Marla threw her head back and laughed without humor. You can try to play the victim, Nathan, but I have proof this time. Irrefutable proof of what a monster you really are. My chest constricted painfully. This wasn't happening. After over a decade of near silence, my mother couldn't just barge back into our lives and tear everything apart with cryptic accusations. Yet here she was, piercing me with that razor-sharp gaze. Aiden, I don't expect you to understand right now, but please, you have to hear me out. She turned back to my dad, contempt etched into every line on her face. It's long past time you paid for your sins, and I'm not leaving here until you do. Dad's face crumpled, and he let out a guttural roar of anguish. My friends scattered as he barreled toward Marla with balled fists. I lurched forward on instinct, grabbing his arm before he could strike her. Dad, stop! I panted, holding him back with every ounce of strength I possessed. What the hell is going on? He froze in my grasp, the fire in his eyes dimming to smoldering embers of despair. I'd never seen him look so defeated. Marla stared at us with an expression I couldn't decipher. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. She cleared her throat, straightening her spine. We have much to discuss, Aiden. Just know that no matter what happens. She met my gaze levelly. I'm here to make things right, no matter the cost. I shuddered at her words, an uneasy feeling blooming in the pit of my stomach. Something told me she wasn't just talking about money. I spent a restless night tossing and turning, my head spinning with Marla's ominous vow. What proof could she possibly have about Dad's supposed misdeeds? And why resurface after over a decade, just to take her revenge? Exhausted, I finally stumbled downstairs around noon to find Marla sitting smugly at the kitchen table. She rose to her feet as I entered, hands clasped in front of her expensive-looking silk blouse. There's my boy. She gave me a sickly sweet smile. Sleep well? What are you doing here? I huffed, eyeing Dad and Jenna where they sat stone-faced across from her. Hasn't there been enough drama? Marla laughed lightly, waving a perfectly manicured hand. Oh, Aiden, this is only the beginning. Something in her casual dismissal of my concerns struck a nerve. My temper flared as scorching anger bubbled in my gut. You think you can just waltz back into our lives after 15 years and start making demands? You lost that right when you bailed on us. For a fraction of a second, Marla's mask of composure slipped, revealing a sneer of pure contempt. Dad tensed beside me, clearly anticipating an eruption, but Marla reined herself in just as quickly, reverting to her simpering, condescending tone. Fair point, perhaps some context is in order. She strolled casually toward the table and eased herself into a chair. You see, Aiden, when I initially left, it was with every intention of providing a better life for you and your father. A proper family. I crossed my arms, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. By abandoning us? By getting away from your father's toxic influence, she countered firmly, all traces of fake sweetness evaporating. Trust me, it was for your own good. A disbelieving scoff burst from Dad's lips before he could stop himself. Says the criminal grifter who's been wanted by the FBI for over a decade. Don't even try to play the victim here, Marla. My head whipped toward Dad, brows furrowed. Criminal? Grifter? The pieces started clicking into place. Marla's refined appearance, the casual opulence she exuded. It all reeked of illegally obtained wealth. Marla's knuckles turned white where her hands gripped the table's edge. She slowly rose to her feet, leaning across the polished wood with a look of pure venom. Don't you dare, Nathan. Your callous deceit is what landed us in this mess in the first place. I left to get some distance to protect our son from your poison. But clearly that was a mistake, because he's become just as morally bankrupt as his old man. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, suffocating under the weight of her cruelty. My own mother thought I was toxic? Bankrupt? Dad slammed his fist down, making me jump. Shut your lying mouth for once in your miserable life. You want to know the truth? His eyes bored into mine, haunted and desperate. Fine, I'll tell him everything. Marla released a bark of laughter, cold and mocking. Oh, this should be rich. Go on then, confess your sins to the boy, pour your black heart out. Dad seemed to deflate, his anger crumpling into weary resignation. It was a long time ago, son. I got involved in some illegal business dealings. Risky investments, backroom payoffs, that kind of thing. Your mother found out and You lying snake, Marla snarled, slamming the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. You committed fraud, Nathan, embezzled millions from your clients, accounts to fund your drug-addled gambling benders. My jaw dropped as the two erupted into shouting, hurling vicious accusations back and forth. Was it possible? Had my dad really been some kind of criminal this whole time? Enough. Jenna's raised voice cut through the chaos like a knife. She stood, quiet authority in every inch of her composed form. Marla, I think you've caused quite enough trauma for one day. For once, Marla looked uncertain, almost afraid. After studying Jenna's steely glare for a long moment, she snapped her mouth shut and readjusted her blouse with stiff, jerky movements. We'll continue this another time, Jenna warned in a low, dangerous tone. And next time you'll bring evidence to back up your slanderous claims. No more vague allegations. Marla's eyes flicked toward me, hate and hunger warring in those dark depths. Her tongue flicked out to wet her crimson lips. Of course, I'll be in touch very soon with the full extent of Nathan's misdeeds. She turned on her heel and strode out, leaving a disquieting sense of dread coiling in the pit of my stomach. Because one thing was for certain, this was far from over. Marla made good on her promise to return quickly. Just 2 days later, I was halfway through an intense round of Call of Conquest with my buddies when the doorbell rang. Shrugging off their protests, I went to answer it. Her shark-like grin was the first thing I saw as I pulled open the door. Hello, Aiden. What do you want now? I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose in exasperation. Straight to business, then. She reached into her designer handbag and extracted a glossy manila envelope. I believe this should clear up any lingering doubts about your father's checkered past. My heart stuttered in my chest as I glimpsed the bold title on the envelope, Dissolution of Marriage and Property Settlement. I accepted the package numbly, dread prickling at the base of my skull. Marla stepped back, folding her arms with a smug purse of her lips. Those are the official divorce records from Nathan and I's separation. Notice anything strange? Fighting a rising wave of nausea, I flipped through the stack of papers, legal filings, affidavits, financial records, until one heading in particular leapt off the page at me. Undisclosed assets and property. No, this can't be right, I muttered under my breath, feeling the room start to spin. Oh, but it is. Marla's eyes glinted with undisguised glee at my obvious discomfort. Your father hid millions from me when we divorced. Squirreled away assets in offshore accounts, properties under assumed names, all so he could drain our family's hard-earned wealth and leave me destitute. The sadistic enjoyment dripping from her words made my skin crawl. I clung to the documents, desperate for an anchor in this emotional cyclone. I don't believe you, I bit out through clenched teeth. Dad would never steal from us. You're twisting the facts somehow. Am I? She arched one perfectly sculpted brow, chin tilted in challenge. Those records look pretty clear to me. Unless you don't think your father is capable of such deceit? Her taunting instantly transported me back to that bonfire weeks ago, the venom and hurt in Dad's voice as Marla laid bare his alleged criminal past. Could her horrific claims about fraud and embezzlement actually be true? I was spared from answering by thudding footsteps behind me. Dad and Jenna appeared in the hall, their expressions darkening in twin looks of contempt upon seeing Marla. "Get off our property," Jenna stated coolly, one hand coming to rest on my shoulder. "Did you show him?" Marla blatantly ignored her, beady eyes fixing on me intently. "Did you see how your father tried to cheat me out of my fair share?" Dad's jaw clenched hard enough to shatter teeth. "Those documents are fakes, you lying snake! I would never hide assets from you, or anyone. These records are verified and legally binding," Marla snapped, her impeccable mask finally slipping as color splotched her cheeks. "I'll have what's mine. How much?" The question came unbidden from my lips, silencing their heated quarrel. Both parents turned to gape at me in shock. I raised my chin, refusing to let my uncertainty show. "How much money are you after, Marla? What's your price to stop this campaign of destruction against our family?" For a long-waited moment, the only sound was my heart pounding like a jackhammer in my ears. Then Marla's blood-red lips peeled back in a triumphant, wolfish grin that curdled my stomach. "I knew you were the smart one, Aiden." She leaned in conspiratorially, every word dripping with oily self-satisfaction. "Here's what I want, the full amount Nathan defrauded from me, down to the last cent, plus interest, of course." I fought not to recoil as her rancid breath fanned across my face. "And just to ensure your compliance." My phone buzzed in my pocket with an incoming text notification. I fumbled to retrieve it while Marla drank in my discomfort, gaze alight with predatory hunger. "You have 1 week to convince your father to pay up. Plus bonus for every day you're late. Refuse and I'll go public with his misdeeds." Another buzz immediately followed, this time with an attachment, a grisly crime scene photo of a bloodied male corpse captioned, "Say goodbye, Dad." I gaped at Marla, utterly aghast and disgusted. There it was, crystal clear. Her objective had escalated far beyond money. Now it was about ruining my father's life and threatening his safety if he didn't cooperate. As Marla's lips curled into a victorious leer, I felt a glimmer of my own grim resolve solidify in my chest. I would get to the bottom of her twisted allegations and restore our family's name, even if it meant playing her cutthroat game for now. No matter what it took. Jenna's house had become my refuge those next few days as Dad and I scrambled to make sense of Marla's damning allegations. With every contradictory document and dubious financial record she unearthed, the noose around Dad's neck seemed to tighten. "I don't understand." I tossed aside another useless bank statement, raking my hands through my sweat-damp hair in frustration. These can't possibly be real, yet they're full of official legal jargon and filings. How could she fake all this? Jenna sighed, removing her glasses to pinch the bridge of her nose. The dark circles beneath her eyes bespoke many sleepless nights, poring over the paperwork. "I'll be honest, Aiden. On the surface, it looks incredibly incriminating. Your mother has clearly invested considerable time and resources to construct this." She replaced her glasses, mouth set in a grim line. "But there are inconsistencies, holes in her narrative I intend to fully expose." A reluctant spark of hope flickered to life in my chest. "You think you can disprove her claims?" "I know I can." The edge of steel in Jenna's tone brooked no argument. She was a skilled lawyer who never went to court unprepared. "The question is whether your mother will listen to reason once I do." My mind flashed to Marla's mocking smirk as she dangled Dad's alleged crimes over our heads. The cold finality in her voice as she issued her ultimatum. Would she really give up her twisted crusade for payback so easily? An uncomfortable silence stretched between us until Jenna suddenly straightened, lips pursed in concentration. "You know, there is one thing about her story that doesn't quite add up." Eagerly, I leaned forward. "What is it?" "Your mother is alleging that the undisclosed assets were part of an effort by your father to conceal his illegal gains and ensure she received little to no divorce settlement, yes?" I nodded slowly, thoughts racing ahead to follow her logic. Well, in that case, why did she allegedly abandon you both penniless on the street? Jenna arched one elegant brow meaningfully. If Nathan was meant to be the one punished financially, leaving her former family with nothing seems contradictory at best. The realization struck me like a physical blow. Marla's entire motivation was built on a foundation of flawed reasoning. What financial motive could she possibly have had to leave Dad destitute if she believed he had stashed away millions for himself? Pieces of her fabricated backstory were unraveling right before my eyes. I remembered the scathing look of contempt on her face, the smoke and mirrors lies about Dad's past crimes. Suddenly, it all clicked into place with crystal clarity. She's after something else. My voice came out a hushed whisper, but Jenna heard me loud and clear. The money, the lawsuits, it's just a cover. Her piercing gaze bored into me, equal parts proud and concerned. I was hoping you'd reach that conclusion yourself. Slowly, deliberately, she slid a sealed yellow envelope across the table toward me. I felt the blood drain from my face at the ominous typewritten label, Confidential Reports re Marla Johnston. With trembling fingers, I tore it open and scanned the pages inside. Police reports, criminal affidavits, mugshots, a damning compilation stretching back over 15 years, all bearing my mother's name. Extortion, fraud, forgery, illegal weapons possession. I felt bile rise in my throat as the full extent of her depravity, her malicious untrustworthiness, finally became clear. The money didn't matter. This was about inflicting as much damage and suffering as possible in pursuit of some twisted agenda, no matter who got caught in the crossfire. My God, my voice cracked as I met Jenna's solemn gaze. How could she do this? What kind of person? A sharp rap at the door cut me off. Dad poked his head in, expression grim. She's here. My heart plummeted into my stomach as Marla's mocking laughter echoed from the foyer, sending shards of ice through my veins. I clutched the file with shaking hands, throat constricted with rage and disgust. There would be no more lies or manipulations. I was done being a pawn in her sadistic game. It was time to fight back. I barely registered Dad ushering Marla into the living room, her piercing cackle slicing through the tense atmosphere like a blade. Well, I was starting to think you'd had a change of heart about cooperating, Nathan. She draped herself across the sofa, flashing me a self-satisfied smirk. Or perhaps young Aiden here has finally come to his senses and... Cut the crap, Marla! My voice rang out with a hard edge I scarcely recognized. Jenna straightened beside me in surprise, but I kept my steely gaze locked on my so-called mother. Marla blinked owlishly, clearly taken aback by my uncharacteristic sharpness. Excuse me? Gripping the file until the edges crumpled, I advanced on her slowly like a predator cornering its quarry. We know all about your twisted game. The money, the bogus lawsuits. It was never really about that, was it? That wolfish glint flickered in her eyes, but I could sense her unease as I continued, closing the distance between us. Dad hovered behind her chair, hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. You just couldn't stand the thought of Nathan and I moving on and being happy without you around to torture us. My lips peeled back in a contemptuous sneer. So you decided to manufacture this insane vendetta and drag us through the mud. How dare you? She started haughtily, but I cut her off. No more lies, I roared, slamming the case file down on the coffee table with a thunderous bang that made her jump. We have your entire rap sheet right here, everything from extortion and fraud to attempted murder. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly as her eyes frantically scanned the damning pages, complexion drained of all color. It would have been almost comical if the situation wasn't so deadly serious. No, you don't understand, she stammered weakly. Those charges, I was framed, set up by someone who, can it? Dad's gravely shout silenced her meager protests instantly. His face was nearly purple with rage. We're done listening to your poisonous deceptions. You miscalculated this time, Marla. Jenna's crisp voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. Your accusations hold no water, and we have all the evidence we need to bury you once and for all. It's over. A heavy, profoundly unsettling silence descended over the room. I could see the frantic gears turning in Marla's head as she rapidly cycled through a spectrum of reactions. Disbelief, rage, terror. Then, to my utter shock, Her expression smoothed into an eerie calm as she slowly rose to her feet. Over. Her tone was mild, but her eyes glinted with a profound malevolence that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Oh, Aiden, you arrogant, naive child. This was never about money or lawsuits. Seemingly from nowhere, she produced a sleek revolver and aimed it squarely at Dad's chest. Both Jenna and I recoiled in horror, but Dad didn't even flinch. It was about making you suffer as I've suffered, Marla hissed in a low, deadly rasp. Tormenting you with the truth before I finally exact my ultimate revenge. You're completely deranged, Dad whispered, his voice thick with revulsion and disgust. Says the man who stole my life away, she shrieked, spittle flying from her lips as the mask finally shattered. You betrayed me in the worst way, Nathan. I lost everything because of you. The hammer clicked back with a deafening metallic scrape, Marla's hand trembling violently. Reacting on pure instinct, I fumbled for my phone and hit record just as she launched into her unhinged rant. I should have finished you off years ago when I had the chance, but I'll savor watching the life drain from your eyes after you've witnessed your precious family torn apart, just like mine was. Unwittingly, she'd revealed her darkest secret without realizing, her zeal for vengeance overriding any rational thought. Bitterly, I wondered if this was how Dad had met her all those years ago, blinded by her beauty until it was too late. But the fleeting satisfaction of exposing her lies was short-lived. Before any of us could react further, Marla pivoted toward me with lightning speed, eyes wild and teeth bared in a feral snarl. "Give me that phone, you stupid brat!" She lunged across the coffee table, revolver raised to smash the screen. On pure reflex, I flinched back, arms pinwheeling for balance, and that's when the deafening bang split the air. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as the gunshot's deafening crack reverberated through the room. I watched in numb horror as Marla crumpled backwards, clutching her shoulder and howling in agony. Blood seeped through her blouse, staining the pristine silk crimson. In the ringing silence that followed, Dad slowly lowered the smoking revolver, his expression one of grim resolution. Jenna rushed to my side, pulling me into a protective embrace as her eyes stayed warily trained on my fallen mother. You shot me!" Marla's strangled shriek pierced the air, her face twisted with disbelief and fury. "Your own flesh and blood." Dad didn't so much as flinch, his hand rocked steady on the gun's grip. "Be grateful that's the only thing I shot after you threatened my family." "Oh, for God's sake, Nathan, spare me the self-righteous nobility act." She spat through gritted teeth, one hand stemming the flow of blood from her wound. "You may have everyone else fooled, but we both know exactly what kind of monster you really are." Surprisingly, Dad's mouth quirked into a rueful half-smile. "Is that so? Because far as I can tell, I'm not the deranged sociopath who just got caught in the act of framing my own husband for crimes he didn't commit. All for the sake of some twisted, meaningless vendetta." Marla opened her mouth to retort, but Dad barreled forward with scorching conviction. "That's right. I know all about your lawyers secretly manufacturing those falsified financial records to cook up this whole ridiculous lawsuit scheme about how you were the one who nearly bankrupted us years back with your shady business dealings and blown investments. I may have made my share of mistakes, but you're the one who torpedoed our family through your selfishness and greed." My head swam dizzily as Dad's impassioned torrent continued to wash over us. All this time, Marla's entire twisted narrative had been built on a foundation of lies and deceit. Once again, she had played the helpless victim to conceal her own malicious depravity. "And just imagine if your delightful plan had actually succeeded, Dad's voice dripped with acidic sarcasm. "You'd have achieved that lovely goal of ruining me and Aiden's lives forever, only to immediately get tossed in prison for fraud, extortion, attempted murder. Quite the family reunion that would have been." I glanced down at the phone still clutched in my white-knuckled grip, the irrefutable audio still recording Marla's deranged confessions loud and clear. Jenna seemed to read my thoughts, giving an infinitesimal nod, the final nail in her coffin. You're not going to get away with this." Marla howled like a wounded animal, eyes wild and manic. One trembling finger jabbed in my direction accusingly. "If I'm going down, that little bastard is coming with me for assaulting his own mother." With those words, The dam of rage and hatred I'd been holding back finally burst. Before anyone could react, I jolted forward and hurled the phone directly into her face, feeling a surge of savage satisfaction as it connected with a dull crunch. "I am not your son!" I bellowed, dimly aware of Dad and Jenna's shocked gasps behind me. "You may have birthed me, but a real mother wouldn't manipulate and threaten the ones she claims to love," Marla shrieked, clasping her now broken nose as fresh blood streamed down her pallid face. For once I held no pity as I glared at her crumpled form with undisguised loathing. "You're nothing but a selfish, evil snake who doesn't deserve to call anyone family." I allowed every ounce of hurt and fury to pour into my voice, all the trauma she'd inflicted on us burning in my chest like wildfire. "So do us both a favor and disappear for good this time." The words seemed to hang in the air between us, an unbridgeable chasm separating our shattered bonds forever. Slowly, Marla raised her head, eyes glittering with unrestrained hatred and a devotion to her twisted cause that defied all rationality. "Mark my words, you ungrateful wretch," she grated out, spitting a mouthful of bloody phlegm at my feet. "If I go down for this, I'm taking every last one of you to hell with me." Unshakable in my resolve, I met her vehement glare with stony defiance. "You first." With a cry of blind rage, she launched herself off the floor straight at me, hell-bent on making good on her final unhinged threat. But Jenna was quicker. Her elbow clocked Marla in the side of the head with a sickening crack, sending her collapsing in a boneless heap. It was over. Finally, the silence that fell over the room was absolute. Dad stepped forward, eyes haunted yet glimmering with faint hope as he gently squeezed my shoulder. "It's time we called this in, son. Let the law handle the rest." I gave a slow, weighted nod of assent, years of pent-up anguish and rage washing away in the wake of our long-overdue victory. Marla's path of destruction was at an end. Now it was our turn to begin healing. The squad cars arrived within minutes, their blazing lights casting the neighborhood in an eerie crimson glow. I watched impassively as the officers hauled a still-ranting Marla to her feet and shoved her into the back of the patrol vehicle. "This isn't over, you hear me?" She thrashed violently against her restraints, spittle flying as she fixed her deranged glare on me. "I'll make you regret ever crossing me, Aiden. I have people, resources. I'll bury you and your whole pathetic family if it's the last thing I do." "That's enough out of you," one of the officers grunted, giving her a shove. Her head cracked against the doorframe, finally cutting off her toxic tirade. "You're going away for a long time after all the charges we've got piled up against you." My jaw clenched as they slammed the door, sealing off her demented shrieks. I couldn't even bring myself to feel a shred of sympathy as she was carted off to her well-deserved fate. Too much damage had already been done. "Son?" I felt Dad's reassuring grip on my shoulder and leaned into his comforting presence gratefully. Jenna hovered nearby, her steely mask slipping to reveal the heavy emotional toll of the last few weeks. With Marla's cacophonous outbursts finally silenced, an eerie lull descended over the scene, until a firm, authoritative voice split the hush. Well, I must say you've certainly got one hell of a story to tell, haven't you, Nathan?" The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as an impeccably dressed man emerged from the shadows, hands buried in the pockets of his obscenely overpriced suit. A tidy smile creased his tanned, angular features as he surveyed the aftermath of Marla's massacre. Beside me, Dad visibly stiffened. "Frederick," he replied in a tight, controlled tone, "what brings a hotshot corporate lawyer like yourself to this side of town?" Frederick chuckled indulgently, casually sidestepping a discarded evidence marker as he strolled in our direction. "Professionally, I was hired to assist the prosecution in building its case against your estranged former spouse. Marla Johnston has been wanted by multiple federal agencies for over a decade on charges of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, you name it. They've been trying to make this bust for years now." He paused to adjust his platinum cufflinks, seemingly oblivious to Jenna slowly edging in front of me in a protective stance. Personally, however, those cold reptilian eyes flicked up to bore directly into Dad. "I must admit, I'm rather curious to hear your side of this deranged tale, old friend, especially the parts implicating you in certain legal indiscretions of your own." an icy fist clenched around my heart at his blatant insinuations. Dad shook his head warily, the barest flicker of trepidation crossing his expression. "Frederick, I swear on my life that any criminal allegations Marla made were outright fabrications too." Yes, of course they were," Frederick interjected with an airy wave of his hand. "I'm simply doing my due diligence in case any, shall we say, unsavory segments of your past happen to resurface during the prosecution's investigation." That same bland smile never faltered. "You understand?" My blood boiled watching this slimeball so casually cast aspersions on Dad's integrity based solely on Marla's spite. Before I could snap, however, Jenna's iron composure sliced through the tension like a scalpel. "If you're quite finished threatening my family with baseless insinuations, Mr. Reeves, I believe you'll find these documents most illuminating." With a deft flick of her wrist, she produced a thick manila folder absolutely stuffed with legal paperwork and correspondence. Frederick's brows arched in obvious surprise as she extended the massive tome towards him. "That's the full, unredacted record containing all of Nathan's financials, communications, and legal filings from the time of his marriage up through their divorce. Every shred of evidence decisively proving my husband's innocence and laying bare Marla's unhinged campaign of defamation against him." Frederick eyed the dossier hungrily for a moment before carefully accepting it. I could see the calculation glinting behind his eyes as he absorbed the weight and substance of what Jenna had just handed him. "You'll also find detailed documentation of Marla's deep familial history of psychosis, delusion, and violence," Jenna continued, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Along with sworn testimony from top clinical psychologists vouching for the legitimacy of these transcripts." That clever little half-smile playing across Frederick's lips faded instantly. His grip slackened almost imperceptibly on the damning file. "I trust the prosecution will have no further need to harass my client with fallacious allegations after reviewing these materials." It wasn't so much a question as a pointed challenge. Jenna's body was ramrod straight, radiating a palpable aura of power and confidence. Frederick held her piercing stare for a long, heated moment. Eventually, some invisible barrier seemed to splinter behind his gaze. He inclined his head in the barest hint of respect. "You've made your point, counselor. Most illuminating." With a crisp pivot, he pivoted on his tightly polished Oxford and strode away without another word. My shoulders finally sagged as the tension bled out of the air around us. "That's my girl," Dad murmured with a swell of unmistakable pride. The fierce protectiveness glimmering in Jenna's gaze as she pulled me close said it all. Together we would persevere no matter what life threw our way. Marla's path of chaos and destruction was finally over. Now our family could begin to heal. The weeks following Marla's arrest were a whirlwind of police statements, legal proceedings, and seemingly endless questioning. Dad and Jenna's preparations paid off immensely. The prosecution glumly conceded they had no case after being confronted with the mountain of exculpatory evidence. Marla's own outburst-laden testimony, filled with deranged ramblings about vengeful payback and ultimate karma, didn't help her cause either. The judge took one look at her extensive rap sheet and personal history of violence, shook his head grimly, and had her remanded into federal custody to begin serving a multi-decade sentence. As for us, it was an adjustment, to say the least. Occasionally I would catch Jenna shooting me these concerned sideways glances, as if she expected me to fly into an emotional tailspin at any moment. Those first few nights I definitely struggled with restless bouts of insomnia, replaying Marla's sadistic threats and accusations endlessly in my mind. Through it all, though, Dad was a constant, reassuring presence at my side. We spent many long evenings sitting in contemplative silence, vocally processing the profound hurt this whole trauma had unearthed in both our lives. "I should have been straight with you from the beginning, son," he said heavily during one such heart-to-heart. The amber glow of the fireplace danced across his careworn features as he nursed a glass of whiskey. "Maybe then you wouldn't have fallen so hard for Marla's mind games." I shook my head slowly, squeezing his hand in a familial gesture that contained multitudes of unspoken emotion. "Don't do that to yourself, Dad. She was always going to lash out, whether I knew the truth or not. Her sickness ran too deep." A somber silence fell between us as we both digested the weight of those words. So much wasted time, so many scorched years of anguish and bitterness at Marla's hand. Yet somehow we had emerged from the ashes, bruised but unbroken. With a weary exhale, Dad leaned back and gazed deep into the crackling flames. Still, I owe you both the biggest apology of all. For a long time, I let your mother's treachery and past mistakes jade me against opening myself up again. I should have had more faith in you, Aiden. In us. He turned his gaze to where Jenna slumbered peacefully in the adjacent armchair, her features finally relaxed in the first untroubled sleep she'd had in weeks. I felt a profound surge of love and appreciation for this remarkable woman as I traced the contours of her familiar profile. After the havoc Marla wreaked, I guess I was just scared of losing everything all over again if I let someone that close. Dad's voice wavered with unguarded vulnerability. His eyes glistened in the firelight. I'm so sorry I ever made you feel like you weren't my entire world, Aiden. You and Jenna, you two saved me from that bitter, lonely path I was stumbling down. In that moment, any lingering shards of resentment I'd been subconsciously harboring toward Dad for his perceived sins melted away entirely. He was right. The toll of Marla's malice had seeped inward and poisoned us almost as insidiously as her vile accusations threatened to tear us apart. But no more. That path ended here. Rising to my feet, I stepped over and squeezed Dad's shoulder with a fierce insistence that stopped his remorseful blubbering in its tracks. He peered up at me, eyes shining with naked hope and affection. We survived, Dad. That's what matters now. I felt the barest hint of a smile tugging at my lips as I gestured to Jenna's sleeping form. We're a family, no matter how broken or battered, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Dad's face crumpled with palpable relief and love. For the first time in recent memory, I glimpsed the shadows of past traumas finally slipping away from his eyes as he reached up to grasp my hand fiercely. Me either, son, he rasped. Me either. In that moment, I felt an identical sense of release, of closure. Marla no longer haunted us and never would again. Her vindictive agenda had crumbled to dust, while the bonds she'd fought so viciously to sever only grew tighter, tempered by the flames of our perseverance. As I gazed upon the faces of my true family, bathed in the dancing firelight, I felt a surge of courage and resolve. No matter what future challenges lay ahead, I knew we would persevere and thrive just like we had tonight, side by side, overcoming any obstacles through our shared resilience and unconditional love. Marla's revenge had stemmed from a place of hatred and self-destruction, but ours would be born through unwavering support and healing, and that was a fight already won.